Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burruss, and we're honored today to have as our guest Dr. Shelley Murphy. Our topic today is the challenges of tracing African American history or ancestry. And so I'd like to say to Dr. Murphy, welcome. And could you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure, be glad to. And thank you for having me. I've been a researcher for over 30 some years now, and it's been difficult because of the challenges that we face. And I'm doing some work with UVA and as also the International African American Museum out of Charleston. And again, the passion is research and ancestry, specifically African American ancestry, and being able to help others achieve that task.
Okay. African American tracing their history can be really challenging. It can also be really painful. What kind of obstacles do African Americans encounter in this research?
Well, one of the first things is not understanding what law was in place that covered as far as African Americans being property versus humans. And that would be knowing where the records are. Are they in the normal place where we would find other records? No, not necessarily. So there's a challenge there in not knowing exactly where to find things, not knowing what records and resources are in the community to get you started. So it creates challenges that some of the records could have been destroyed, or not recorded. And a lot of them don't show up until somebody dies. And if they were property, they were either sold or handed off to somebody else. So understanding the whole system of slavery and the law at the time and knowing your community and what resources there help to combat some of those challenges.
Well, one of the challenges, we think all Black folks were slaves during that time, but many of them weren't slaves.
Absolutely.
And that presents another issue there. But how do you get started in this field of ancestry?
My mother.
Your mother.
My mother always talked about what her grandmother said. She sat at the knees of my grandmother, and who I didn't know, and my great grandmother, I'm sorry, and she told stories that her grandmother told her that her father was a slave. And I like, what does that mean? And that piqued my interest to understand what that meant. When did that happen? Because, we weren't taught that in school. So I had to understand and learn what was going on, on that history. And once I started digging and learning things to find out, well, who else was the slave? Who were the free people of color? Because we have both in our family. I've got a slaveholder in the family as well. And so my interests peaked, like in the late 70s. And so, and it got me going. I haven't stopped since.
Okay. Well, and my experience has been the old folks never talked about what happened, and so we never learned.
Well, we've got
history.
some of those too. That's another one of those challenges. Some folks are going to take that information they know, and it's going to go right to the grave with them because they were told not to tell.
Why do you think individuals, families should research their ancestry?
As an African American myself, I really don't know where I came from. And as you can see, I'm mixed. But if I'm just tracing the African American side, I don't even know what the true surname I have. Is it Murphy? That's not anything from Africa. So again, it's important to know where you come from and who were the people that you came from. What did they do? What were their lives? What were their beliefs? And loving the fact that they survived, the ones that were enslaved, they survived one of the most horrific things we have in history, from, for this country is slavery in the slave system. And learning about them gives a lot of pride. And I'm evidence that they survived. And I think that needs to be shared through generations. And I think it's important to understand the trials and tribulations that our ancestors endured, and it should be handed down.
Well, you're correct, and you talked about surnames. We have to remember that we think that all African Americans or slaves took their last names of their masters, but a lot of them didn't. So when you start looking for trying to go back, it becomes very difficult because they just made up a name, and you don't know that until you start getting into it, like you're saying. What is the
That's
key?
one of the myths. Mm-hmm. That's one of the myths, is that the enslaved population took on the surname of the slave owner. Mm-hmm. They did not. Only about 15% took on their slave owner's name. It could have been a prior slave owner, it could have been a parent slave owner, or it could have been, like you said, some name they just picked. They had that opportunity when they became free after the Civil War to take whatever name that they choose to take.
Good. So what is your key to, what do you feel is the key to conducting the African American ancestry research?
I think the key is knowing what law is in place, which will direct you towards what records had to be recorded or had to be made, and understanding that there's that myth that African Americans can't get past 1870 census, and that's the first federal population census where people of color had a full name unless they were free people. And it's just not true, because people had full names, African Americans that were enslaved, prior to 1870. And one of the greatest examples and key for me for the research I do at UVA, which is finding enslaved laborers' descendants, is the Freedmen Bureau. And the proper name of that is the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Most people don't understand that the refugees were white people. Of course, the freedmen were formerly enslaved. That bureau was open from 1865 to 1872. Now, there are a few states, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Fort Monroe in Virginia, specific area, that had pre-bureau records. In other words, prior to 1865. They had some records being set up in 1863. That is the key collection for me in the work that I do for the slave era, and being able to go through them. And there's millions and millions of records within that collection. And they're on ancestry.com, they're on familysearch.org, or the National Archives.
Okay. The Census Bureau seems to be the primary one. Is that the primary one? But my daughter, she did our ancestry a few years ago, and she said one of the problems was prior to a certain time, African Americans were property and were personal property and not human beings. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. The federal population census was taken every 10 years. Mm-hmm. Now, states could take census in between there, and some states did. Now, the population census started 1790 through right up to 1940. The 1950 population census comes out in April 2022. The census gives you limited information. If you were property and not human, you were not recorded in those census. Now, there is two slave schedules, 1850 and 1860. Those are specifically showing a slave owner and the number of slaves they had. Enslaved individuals are not identified by their names. They are only identified by their gender and their age and their color. So there's a lot of misinformation in the census, and that's the first go-to for genealogists or family historians to go to. But they have to remember that is only one record for one day at a time that you might find an ancestor on there. They're not as reliable as people think. And one of the reasons I say that is because genealogy research is about time, place, and asking a whole bunch of questions. So again, knowing what law was in place, the time era you're working in, and if you can use the census as a hint, and that's what they should be used as, then that helps your research and furthering, you know, that you're going to combat some of those resources that are challenges to you. And again, the population census is the number one go-to, but they've got the most inaccurate information. Mm-hmm. And the good example is that is because people are self-reporting, and we don't know who the people are that are reporting on the census. We don't know who gave the information. And again, African Americans were not privy to be on the census unless they were free people at that time. And again, who gave the information? It could have been the child next door, and the people were at home when the enumerator came by and they said, oh, where are these people from? Or who lives in this house? Again, it's not as accurate. You need other supporting evidence to help support what you do see in the population census.
Okay. So you probably mentioned some of it before, but what is your favorite collection?
Oh, the Freedmen Bureau by no question, no doubt, the Freedmen Bureau.
Okay, so that's your go-to type of research, go to the Freedmen Bureau.
If I'm researching during slave era, yes,
slave era.
It is, because this is where I get self-reporting from them. This is where they have a chance to come in after the war is over. They're instructed basically to go to these field offices that is set up as the first social services, and in my opinion, where formerly enslaved, poor, destitute whites can go and get services like rations, transportation money. I could show up at the Freedmen Bureau field office and say, my wife and kids or my husband or grandparents or whatever were sold to another state. The Bureau would have helped me get to that other state to reunite with my family. They also provided, besides rations, there were schools that were set up called the Freedmen Schools, just like Jefferson School in Charlottesville. There's also things like the hospitals. They had court hearings. People could file complaints. And I read these records on a daily basis. You have people still fighting to get their children from a former master. Some of the records will give you their name, the location, the former plantation owner, and then the status of your health or what are you doing at that time. It also includes marriage records. Formerly enslaved people who cohabitated as being enslaved can go to the Freedmen Bureau, and then their marriage is now recognized and documented that I'm the husband, I'm the wife, these are our children, and also here's the former slave owner that we had, which is a tremendous help for people that are researching. It is definitely my go-to, and I hope more people will realize and start using those records. They take time to get through. Virginia, field office records are indexed, but there's the state level ones that are not, and of course, headquarters, which would be out of DC, but they are the best solution to help, especially for African American research and during slave era time.
So if I was to get started on researching my ancestry, where would I go? To my local Louisa Historical Center or Charlottesville Historical Society, or would I go to the county office to start looking through the records?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is that you write down what you know.
Okay.
What do you know? What is oral history? What's your goal? Setting a goal for your research, if you're trying to find who the great grandparents were or the great great grandparents, You want to stay focused and then organize your research.
Could you show this?
There is a lot of online services available and a lot of local services that are available. Your historical society might be the first place, after you start accessing online census and things like that. I would highly recommend that people think about using a timeline and start recording things in chronological order as they find them, and then cite the resource where they get them from. But your courthouse, your historical society, those things would be my second stage, not the first stage. You start with what you know at home, talking to other relatives, then start looking at the census, make sure you got the right area, and go forth from there. Because you're writing a story once you're doing this research.
Okay, we have Murphy's So What analyst chart. And I was wondering if you could go through it to let them know what they need to do and where they could get this chart.
Absolutely. That is a method that we use at the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute, which is the only one in the United States. We've been around for 10 years. And this So What chart is basically telling you to ask questions on what you're seeing on a document. It's a way of analyzing and exhausting a search. So if you're looking at a death record, you start questioning the information and basically saying, does this add up? Does it make sense? Is there any gaps in here? Or how does this connect to somebody else? And then from there, when you're analyzing, you're thinking about, well, what do I do with the next steps? But again, you're extracting as much information out of a document that you can that would lead you to build a good research plan or research strategy to go further in the research. So you always want to question the information that's on a document. Not saying it's right or wrong, but what you want to do is say, well, why was this here? What's missing? Who do I need to connect? This, that, and other.
So could you give the audience your website address so they can get this document?
You can go to familytreegirl.com, which is a website. And then I have a Facebook page that's Finding Enslaved Laborers at UVA. And you can request, send me a message, follow us along. A lot of the challenges in who I'm researching is noted on that Facebook page. And that's Finding Enslaved Laborers at UVA. And that is probably the best place besides my email, which is shellyviola@gmail.com. Every Friday night at 7:00, and I mean every Friday, I have a Freedmen Bureau Friday. People are open to come in. The first couple hours is introducing people to the Freedmen Bureau records, and everyone typically will have ties to Central Virginia, which is the reason I set it up, is to try to locate descendants of those enslaved laborers that built that university for Thomas Jefferson.
Okay, you're also with the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. What's your role, and why would you suggest folks become members of not only that historical society, but their local society in many of the counties, surrounding counties?
Absolutely. Number one, for your research, any research, you want to always exhaust your local resources. Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society is one of those local resources. Each county typically will have a historical society. My role with Albemarle Charlottesville Society is the board president, and I have been for the last couple of years. What they have is local information. That means it could be something that connects to you. There's a library, there's a research opportunity, they have manuscripts, they have collections, and it could be on any topic relating to something historical. A lot of people have donated their family papers to the local historical society in your community. So one of the reasons I would suggest people become members is because that means you have access, even though it's public, but that means you're going to get the monthly magazine, you're going to get the newsletter, you have access to a library, and you can book appointments and sit down one-on-one. There's a lot of volunteers in there, which we love our volunteers to come in and help with the public. They are back open now, so people can still make appointments, but there's an opportunity to research there and also get assistance on your genealogy research journey.
Do you have a location for them? What is their location, and do they have a website that people
They
can
do.
go
It's
to?
albemarlehistory.org, and they are located right downtown on 2nd Street on the corner, right alongside the Jefferson Madison Regional Library, the central
okay.
branch. They are located, as a matter of fact, our backs kind of connect. And one of the things I'd like to share is that because JMRL, the library, Central Library, is an affiliate library to the Mormon Church or Family Search, that means the public computer that is in the Library of the Historical Society has that access. That means anything that's on lock on familysearch.org is open, and you will be able to see it just as if you were at a family history center or you were in Salt Lake City researching at the Family History Library there. They are #1 for records. The Mormon Church, Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne is #2 for U.S. records.
Okay. So you mentioned the memorial to the enslaved laborers. How are you connected, and how is that going?
It's a beautiful memorial that UVA has put up, recognizing the services in the labor of enslaved individuals. Enslaved individuals were rented to the university, and they were laborers that built the university. Now, my affiliation with that, I was hired to find descendants of those enslaved laborers. I was given a list, about 2,000 names. A lot of them are first name only. Some have slave owner names attached to it. Some don't. Some do have a surname. And so again, my job is to research to find descendants of those enslaved laborers, to welcome them to that facility, and also to know what their ancestor had done. And it is a beautiful memorial there. It's open basically 24/7. I hope people get out in the Charlottesville area and go visit the memorial. And it is right there on grounds.
Okay. What are your challenges there that you're experiencing with this research, and tell the community how they can help?
Some of my challenges is because I'm dealing with not knowing the location. So if I get the name of the slaveholder and say I have the enslaved person, I don't have a location. And then again, the enslaved individual might not have a surname. And it's at the point now, and I've been doing it now about 1.5 years. We've had some great successes. I have 105 or 8 trees built on Ancestry doing the research. One of the key factors is that you also have to, if you're doing African American research, you also have to research the white people as well, be it the enslaver, whoever it is. If they're connected with that family, you need to track who's in that community. So these trees that I have are on the white families as well as the enslaved individual or the enslaved labor. So the challenge is, again, first figuring out where are they. You know, it could be in 1817. I might be looking in 1820s, 30s, whatever, you know, as that university was being built. The other challenges is what name did they take once they become. I can't jump right to 1870 because I have to get them prior to that, because their name could have changed again. That's why I say the Freedmen Bureau records are key for my research in the slave era, because this is where they had a choice. When they got to that field office, that agent said, which all the field offices were run by the military. So what that also tells you is there is documentation, right?
Okay.
There's papers. That means letters, there's circulars, there's orders given, and there's records, all kinds of records, the complaints, the court hearings, and so forth. So they had the chance to take whatever name they wanted to. And it might not have been the name that's in the record from the list that I was given. UVA had a couple of graduate students that put together a list, and they tracked the financial ledgers.
Okay.
Anywhere the university paid for enslaved labor, that's where
Okay.
they recorded it. So they built a spreadsheet for me.
Okay, we're running out of time. I just want to make sure the audience know about Save the Date, Sunday, September the 26th.
Yes, September 26th, I'll be talking in support of the Links and the Albemarle Sharpsville Historical Society, walking through the challenges of African American research. I hope people can register on the Zoom. It's free, and come in and sit through this time.
Okay. All right, so Dr. Murphy, we got about a minute left. Could you sum up what you want to leave with the audience within 30 seconds?
What I'd like to leave with the audience is the fact that know your family, know where you come from. If you're just getting started, talk to other family members, whoever the elders are in your family, and start writing things down.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you're very knowledgeable. And one question, is some of this information public access, open to the public from the memorial of the enslaved labor?
Yes, the descendants of the enslaved laborers at UVA also have a website, and there's a list of the names on there as well. And also you can access the Jewel site at UVA, and that's JUEL. They could access that site and see enslaved laborers, slave owners, and also overseer information.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm your host, Melvin Burruss. Our guest has been Dr. Shelley Murphy. Go to the website, neighborhoodlawcenter.com, or you can go to YouTube. Just type in Neighborhood Law Center, and we'll pop up. Peace and God bless.